All right, I think we are good to go. Hello, everyone. My name is Kiesha Garrison, and I am Director of Communications and Culture for the AI Platform team at Microsoft. And I am so excited to be here today. I mean, when I was a little girl growing up in small town Louisiana, I could not have imagined that what was going to happen to my life was that I'd find myself at the table with a whole bunch of people who are building technology that's going to influence all of our lives. Like little Kiesha just didn't see this coming. So I feel really fortunate to be here today and to be part of a discussion with a lot of incredible humans that I get a chance to work with at Microsoft. So before I introduce them, I just want to say kind of set the stage for what this panel is about. Everyone working in technology has an important role to play, not just in the organization at large, but as an individual. Every time a business or a product plan comes out, we all have to decide what's my individual point of impact against that product or that business plan. And I think that when it comes to big ambitions around diversity and inclusion and culture, that should be the same. When your company says, I have something to do, we have these big goals and ambitions around D&I and culture, everyone can look at that and say, what is my point of impact here? So this session will explore how a handful of leaders in the AI space at Microsoft are using their influence to change the way we approach work in these different areas of the AI business. So I just want to let you know who we have here today. We are joined by Sarah Bird. She is Principal Program Manager for Responsible AI on our team. We have Widad Machmouchi, who's a Principal Data Scientist in our Experimentation organization. Marieke Iwema, Principal Design Manager in Conversational AI, and Thomas Jimma, Partner Engineering Manager for Azure Machine Learning. Now, what we're going to do to start, we're going to begin hearing from each of them about work that they are a part of in AI and how they view their own specific role in making an impact in that space. And then after that, I'll have a few questions for each of them, and then we'll take some of your questions if you would be so inclined to share some questions in the chat. We have our friend Lars Ojukwu grabbing those questions to make sure I don't miss a whole bunch of them. But for now, let's just get started with hearing some of the stories from our panelists. I'm going to go to Sarah Bird first.
Great. So I started my career as a researcher in Microsoft Research and realized pretty quickly that my passion was actually not just building the core technology, but taking this all the way to production and into the hands of people and seeing that impact in the world more immediately. And so my career has been focused on taking early stage technology and sort of making it a reality in product. And my ultimate project right now is Responsible AI, where we have to take every idea we have in research and more and bring that to bear in the creation of our technologies. So right now, my role is to lead our Responsible AI efforts across the Azure Cognitive Services, which are both a sort of the core model as an API that you can use. So you can use something like speech to text as a developer. But these models also power a lot of our products inside of Microsoft. So if we were using Microsoft Teams here, you could have live transcription, and that would be powered by the same speech-to-text model. And so we're working to not only make sure that we develop the models responsibly, but also make sure that our customers use them responsibly and really figure out how to innovate in this space, because a lot of the techniques and innovations that come as a result of Responsible AI just make better products, and they make products that work for more people and have a better impact in the world. And so that's me, and that's what I'm doing. I don't know, Kiesha, is there anything else you want me to talk to?
I think that's a good starting point. So thank you for that, Sarah. Now let's hear from Widad from Experimentation Land. Tell us about the work that you do.
Sure. Thanks for having me here. It's really great to be talking about kind of the work that we do and how it influences users overall. So I've been at Microsoft for 7 years, and throughout those 7 years, I've been focused more on the A/B testing and the experimentation aspect of shipping product. So instead of just shipping your product after you develop a model to ship it to 100% of the users, what you really want to do is you want to test the impact of your product before you kind of ship it to all of your users. So our experimentation platform allows products at Microsoft, pretty much every single product at Microsoft, to roll their changes and their features bit by bit to first measure the impact that we have on the user. And really, this is kind of the crux of this, is to measure impact on the user before we tell them this is 100% what you should see. Because with every model that you develop, with every change that you make, there might be some unintended consequences that you have. There might be some errors or some bugs or some things that you haven't even foreseen. So employing A/B experimentation and A/B testing will actually safeguard our products against unintended consequences and allow us to catch them and fix them before we expose them to the whole population. But not only that, it also allows every engineer, every PM, and every person, every employee at Microsoft to have this ability of saying, oh, I have an idea and I want to test it. So instead of just relying on what the leader thinks should be shipped, you go and you code your feature and then you ship it. With experimentation, you get the ability to say, oh, I want to test whether my idea actually works. How do my users respond to it? So there's really this concept about democratizing software development with experimentation, because any engineer can code their feature and test it first, see the impact, and then make the argument or make the case that users are reacting well to this feature, so we should ship it. So this is really what our experimentation platform allows products to do at Microsoft, is to make it as smooth of a process to test your product, measure its impact on the users, listen to what your users are telling you before you ship 100%, and then release that feature to them so that they can actually enjoy it after detecting any possible unintended consequences with this. So really, for me, kind of A/B experimentation is really about listening to the user, measuring the user, and really giving them what they want.
Thank you for that, Marieke. So now I want to go to Marieke. Oh no, actually, first, before we go to you, Marieke, let's go to Thomas. Thomas, let's hear about the things that you do in machine learning.
Yeah, thank you. So my name is Thomas, and I work in Azure AI platform. I'm an engineer. I've been at Microsoft for almost 13 years. Some of the things that we do in Azure machine learning is basically like my team focuses on the enterprise adoption of AI. So what it means is basically we want to make sure that their AI systems are secure, they're compliant, they're responsible. More importantly, they are fair. We understand, AI is basically taking traction, and everyone is excited about it. We also understand that there are challenges, right, with bias and data privacy and security, with compliance and responsible use of the AI systems. More importantly, we want to build systems that work for everyone, not just selected group of people. So, we're excited about it, but we understand the challenge, and we want to be in the forefront of that. That's me.
Thank you, Thomas. And Marieke, off to you.
All right. So I am Marieke Iwema. I'm a user experience manager for Conversational AI. I'll tell you a little bit about myself as well. I have 4 kids, blended family, 2 dogs, 3 cats.
How many dogs?
So if you hear one of them, very well possible. So my background is industrial design engineering, so technical, but not in software engineering. And I sort of accidentally got myself a job at Microsoft. So I moved from the Netherlands to the US. I was going to stay for a year, still here. And I'm actually now at my 2nd time around at Microsoft, and oh boy, has this company changed, and changed for the better, actually. So I've done a bunch of things in the meantime, but back at Microsoft now. So I lead a team of designers and one researcher. And all of them have a variety of background. Actually, at the moment, they're all across the globe, India, Europe, Canada, and Seattle. Anyway, so what we do is conversational AI. So that is, we're working closely with PMs and engineers to create conversations or create experiences that basically allow humans to interact with computers and devices in a as human way as possible, so natural language understanding. And so it's complicated because, for us as humans, you go to the drive-through, you order a coffee, I'm like, oh yeah, I'll have a coffee. Oh, no. I want to have a mocha. Oh, and can you put like whipped cream on that? Hey kids, what do you want to do? Oh yeah, free cake pops. And oh yeah, no, I don't want a mocha. Can you please change that to an espresso? So And then at the end of the drive-through, you just expect that, you know, the barista just got all that and got it all right. So for a bot, that is extremely hard because like there's changes of conversation, there's like other voices, you know, such as talking to the kids and not to the actual barista. Anyway, so what I work on is how do you create those kind of conversations, and how do you actually, I don't create the conversations themselves, but the platform for others to create those experiences. So the end user is an engineer, but for me, it really is the end user after all. So how can I empower people to create, you know, responsible experiences, diverse experiences? Because really, you know, what it takes is a whole bunch of people, not just engineers, to design this and put this together. So how do you bring a multidisciplinary team together to build something complex like this? So that's what I'm passionate about, and I'll leave it at that for now.
Thank you all for kind of setting the stage and giving us a little bit about what you do in the AI space. So it looks like your video's back. So the crux of this conversation, I really want to hear a little bit about specific ways that you show up as a leader in the work that you do. You all work in such different areas of AI. And I want to start with Sarah. So Sarah, what I understand in your work, you help take cutting edge ideas in responsible AI from research all the way through like helping them get into production as soon as possible. So that whole speed thing is a kind of a tough thing to navigate, I would imagine. What type of role do you have? With the type of role that you have, what is your influence at that intersection of research and production of things that in the responsible AI space?
Yeah, so for my role, I am working both across our organization, all of the different teams that are building each of these products, these models, right? We have speech to text, we have vision, we have decision, and we have language services. And so we both need to work, right? I need to work with the product team to help them solve the challenges they have, right? They might have an issue that they know about, like, hey, I actually, you know, I want to fix this thing in my product, or I want to add a feature that does this. And so we can, you know, come in and help them connect with the right expertise, give them guidance on what is actually feasible versus what is still an open research question. But then we also have cases where what we want to do is say, hey, maybe you haven't thought about doing this, but this is going to make your product better. This is going to make it work for more people. It's going to make it more robust. And working to influence them to invest in this area and do this work and put it on the roadmap. So similarly, then we want to work with the research community and with the policy community to help them understand, here's the challenges on the ground, here's the reality, here's the problems we need you to pick up and work on, here's the problems that we hope you can help us with right now, or we hope you can help us with in 2 years when we get there. So it's really an exercise in working with quite a lot of people with different backgrounds who bring different perspectives, and bringing this all together and then making sort of a plan that everyone from those different perspectives sees, oh, it does, like, this does make sense to make the trade-offs in this way and do that. And so that's in some sense kind of mechanically what it looks like. And if I think about what we're trying to do ultimately, I think it's really two things, right? We want to make the products, you know, responsibly developed and then enable our customers to use them responsibly. And so in some ways this is core product development work, but then there's a lot that we want to do in terms of our product development culture in order to enable us to be really great at this type of work, right? So for example, if we want to do quality of service fairness work where we're trying to you know, look at the accuracy of the model for a particular group of people, we might want to be collecting a test set to be able to understand the accuracy for that group, or we might want to collect a training data set to have more of that in our training data and improve the performance. Well, it's not such a simple thing to just collect that data set, right? We actually need to understand what are we actually trying to represent? What is different about this group in terms of that particular model that we would, or set of communities that we would want to represent. And so a lot of the work we end up needing to do is both spend time with experts, but spend time with people representing those communities, understand those differences and how they might impact their relationship to their technology, their representation in the technology, their experience and performance of the technology. And so a lot of it is also just changing the way as an organization we think about how we develop technology. Historically, we've been very fortunate to be able to, for a lot of the tech we developed, right, start like, oh, I'm building an operating system and I need to look at this layer of abstraction and I don't need to think about anything outside of my box. And one of the things we're learning with responsible AI is you have to think about the impact of your technology. You have to think about things that are really far away from the box that you feel like you're working in, because the decisions you make will impact them in all of those other layers and the ultimate outcome. And so a lot of the work I think we end up doing in practice is not just solving the technical problems, but helping teach and learn together as an org how we think about developing in a world where the decisions we make, even at this layer of the technology, have significant impact out in the world. So that's one way to look at it.
I want to ask you a follow-up question, because there are a lot of examples in some of the earlier sessions today about just some of the real world impacts and like personal impacts to people of AI gone wrong. And I'm curious how you sit at your desk and someone brings you a new idea. And where do you start with trying to think about, okay, I need to break down what the different issues might be with this particular idea someone has brought me?
Yeah, so there's a couple different ways, right, that we might start doing work in the sort of ideal model, which is where we're moving to with all of our technology. You start with an impact assessment, and so in that case, we're actually sitting down, maybe even before we decide to start working on the technology, and say, okay, what is this technology? What are the potential benefits of it? What are the potential downsides? What settings might it be used in versus not? And how does that affect those benefits and downsides for like different stakeholders? And doing that envisioning exercise in a very, very detailed way helps us then go into all of the design process, everything, and say, hey, if we make this decision here, like if we choose this prediction problem versus that prediction problem, then we can mitigate a lot of potential harm, but still get all of the benefits we were looking for. And so in an ideal world, we're kind of actually doing a lot of that up front, and that actually just makes everything a lot easier. You can just kind of design in what we're looking for. But with all these technologies, right, some of them have already been out there. And also they evolve, right? People are incredibly, wonderfully creative and find new ways to use the technology. And then new challenges come up that maybe we weren't expecting. And so in those cases, we're looking at it and saying, oh, is this a new opportunity, right? Should we change a feature in our product to make it easier for people to achieve this use case? Or should we put more documentation so people understand that it doesn't work that well for the use case they're trying to use it for? And so it's sitting down and kind of, in all of these cases, doing that assessment of what are we trying to achieve here, and what are we trying to mitigate, and then what are the tools we have to bear? And the tools are everything from the core, like the interface design, the model itself, the guidance we give to customers. We are now creating design patterns, example like best practices for how to implement things, design templates, including things like a human in the loop. So there's a lot of different techniques that we can sort of bring to the table to figure out how we want to address a particular issue.
Thank you for sharing that. I think for people who may be entering into the field of responsible AI, entering into technology, it's good to hear what those, even the terminology that people use when they talk about here's how we move through the processes. So thank you for that. Widad, I want to ask you a question. I love what you were talking about in terms of connecting with users, listening to users. I know that in your work, you advise not only people in the AI platform engineering team, but you're talking to teams all over Microsoft, trying to help them better listen to users so that they're making better decisions about the things that they're building. I would imagine that teams you encounter feel like they're experts in their users. So how do you approach expanding people's ways of thinking about how they listen to their users and even what they're listening for?
Yeah, and I think that's really like sometimes, thinking about, oh, I need to test my feature before I ship it, seem to be kind of, some people can see it as a hurdle. It's like, oh, but I've done all my due diligence. I did pass all my quality checks. Why is that needed? And then when the easy answer is that when you're working with such a complex system with big products, big models in general, it's really hard to really anticipate every single, the impact of every single change that you make. And, we've been doing this for 14 years at Microsoft, and we have seen many examples of where, someone would be almost 100% sure, no, this is definitely something that's going to ship. It's, it has all these changes that are really great on for our users. So why should I run an experiment? And then going back to what actually Sarah was saying, it's like you really sometimes, even when you're looking through, trying to make sure that your model, your feature has the intended impact, you typically sometimes look at it from the data set that you have, the data set that you've worked with. But eventually it is still a sample of the population that you're shipping the product to. So really you need to make sure that anything that you're shipping to the population that you wanted to ship to is actually will reflect the same results you've seen in your data set. Some simple example of these is geographies. Like typically there's a big focus on ENUS, but then sometimes if you're trying to ship a feature that's facing also other markets, you might miss some localization features that makes it harder to read this. Like maybe you've by default set your language to English and you're shipping it to a market that doesn't measure that. And we've seen so many examples of these at Microsoft that even with just like 2-3 days of running an experiment, you're able to detect an issue that you might not have seen. And this is really part of what we call failing fast, is identifying an issue quickly, iterating it, and then going to the kind of trying fast, it again and making sure it satisfies all the
and often.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. And I think so the concept of the reason why we say fail fast is that it's not actually failing. Like using that motto is really saying that if you're not actually making mistakes, you're not really expanding beyond your comfort zone. And we want our diverse engineers to bring in the ideas that they want to test and be confident that if there is anything unintended, that they're able to catch it quickly. And that's really what experimentation can be used as safe deployment. You're really you're using it as a risk management to be 100% sure that you are doing the best thing you can to your users, that you're not exposing them to a harm that you could have stopped earlier. So really kind of that story is really something that even product at Microsoft really relate to, because they really want to ship the best experience they can for their users. So typically when you get those first few examples of missing something, or even not only that, being able to actually see what you're doing to your user, if you're able to measure how well you're improving your experience and quantifying it and celebrating it, that's actually something that's very rewarding. You're immediately able to measure the impact, a change you made on millions of users that are going to use your product. And this is really I believe this is not necessarily something that everyone is able to see, being able to properly quantify that impact. And that's really what experimentation is really super important. But on the other hand, with similar to any other tool, experimentation itself needs to have its own boundaries to work with. So a lot of what we try to do at the experimentation platform is to kind of make sure we don't have confirmation bias that's being reflected in our platform, to make sure that, we think that we're actually measuring on all our users, but are we covering all the segments that we need to cover? Are we actually running an experiment that will catch the impact that we think we're going to catch? So some of the things that we do for that is something that we call segment of interest. So for any metric that you're trying to measure, we automatically try to detect, is that metric moving differently in different segments of the population? So that's how can you detect things like different markets are behaving differently, heavy users are behaving differently than light users, users who use certain features are behaving differently. And by doing this automatically, we're removing any bias you have by just checking for the segments you care about, and we check automatically for all of your segments. So these tools are what we use to kind of make sure that while experimentation experimentation itself is a great democratization tool in terms of software development. It still requires its own constraints to make sure you're not making kind of any, or you're not missing any major things you need to look at before you ship your product.
Got it. Thank you. Driving experimentation culture, get people out of their gut and into the reality, but also making sure that they're not just measuring what they want the data to tell them.
Yep, exactly. Confirmation bias is quite powerful, so you want to fight against that.
Yep.
All right. So Thomas, I want to check in with you. So I think the potential dangers of getting machine learning wrong are well documented, especially as it relates to populations that are often not paid attention to. As we mentioned just now, bias isn't it's in people, it's in data, it's in systems. When you think about building diverse teams to build AI, like that absolutely helps, but we all still come to the table with a lens that we have had professionally or personally in our lives. So I think someone was making the point earlier, even a diverse team, you could put all the diverse people in the room that you want, but then how do you as a leader then coach people in the diverse team to then mitigate the impacts of bias? Because everybody's still coming with bias.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, so when we talk about diversity and inclusion, a lot of the people, just to talk about the numbers and the percentage of representation in the team. And it's just, the data is just on the surface, right? So when we think about it, it's all about being inclusive in whatever you're building. As an example of this is, my wife is white and I'm Black, and she really loves taking, selfies, and especially like at nighttime when we go out and, we're taking selfie pictures, and her face is basically the face detector on the iPhone clearly can capture her face very well. Sometimes I'm just in the background, right? Like when you think about, there are so many technical explanations of why that happens. But one part of it is basically, like if someone is, and that team is diverse and they have similar complexion and all, and the right testing is happening, at least they should be able to catch those type of issues, right? So when we think about, diversity and inclusion, it's not just about the number. It's about just basically building the product that works for everyone. And more importantly, you can hit all the numbers, right? Like especially for when you talk about AI systems, you can have all the diverse teams that you want, but if you don't have the right culture, if you don't retain them, and that's still going to be a problem, right? And the other most important thing in AI systems is data completeness as well, right? You need to have data that represent the entire population. This is a chicken and egg problem, right? If technology is accessible to each and every one of us the right way, opportunities given to people, then you will be able to get the right amount of data, right? So unfortunately, the underrepresented population didn't have access to a lot of the technology. So creating access for that is super important. The other thing is,
I actually wanted to jump in there. Like even if you have the right people at the table, or lots of people or diverse people at the table, like how do they collaborate? Like which voices are heard and how are they heard? So what I see a lot is, we got the disciplines and engineers and writers and designers and PMs and like what have you, everything in between, data scientists as well. Like how do they work together so that we get the best of everybody? And part of that is communication. Part of that is, building social relationships, but also like how do you make the work that everybody's doing visible and transparent to the other disciplines? So you can add your own value. So like if some developer has created a conversation or like a flow of a conversation, whatever, in my area, and I can't see it because it's written in code, and I may be able to read code but not write code, I have no idea if this is the way I intended it to be, or if it's overlooking things. I can't even test it. So finding ways to make the technology and the models and the experiences visible for all the disciplines, I think is another important part to make sure that all voices are heard.
Yeah, absolutely.
Back to you.
Oh, thank you. Yes, absolutely. As that's about the culture, right? Like one of the things that maybe I should expand on is like when we think about our culture, it's not just about having the diverse set of people, right? If we don't hear their voice, if we don't include them in the decision-making process, if we also basically amplify their voice and their impact, at the end of the day, we're still going to end up, building the wrong product, right? So that's super critical and important. Thank you for adding that. Back to you, Kiesha.
I'm glad that you raised that, Marieke, because then when I think about the people, and you're talking about being able to empower people to build the conversational AI technology that you're talking about and the multidisciplinary approach, like when you think about building that village of multidisciplinary people, what is your role? Like what part of that process can you impact of like bringing those different people to the table to be able to represent all the different disciplines, so we're hearing more voices?
Well, part of it is like making sure that my own team has a diverse background, and I'm saying I'm using diverse in the most in the broadest sense, because it's also like backgrounds and experience. Like I have some of my designers who are super technical, whereas others are incredibly creative. So what is important is putting the right matches together. So how do we put feature teams, or whatever we call it, of the different disciplines that really complement one another? So if you have a really technical, really nasty thing to sort out, I'll probably put my most technical designer on that. If there's something about like stitching something together, I'll put another person that is really good at that. But it also means like who are their counterparts, and how how do we each stay up to speed on what it is that one another is doing. So communication, collaboration. So for example, like working with the different disciplines, but also as a group of designers, empowering each other and like basically filling in what another person might have overlooked. So building a team, building a lots of, making it, how do I say this? Basically sharing in the raw. So even if something is not quite done, when it is on paper, when it is visible, that's a really great point for other people to be like, oh, well, I thought about it differently. So all of a sudden, the conversation becomes tangible. So that's just one of the ways.
Kiesha, I want to add on this. I think one thing that we've also seen in our team, so when you think about A/B testing, it's not particularly a single field, right? Like, so you see people coming from very different backgrounds. And one of the things that we're trying to do in our team is that to make sure that these different backgrounds get also reflected on how we build our own platform. So for people we have people who have background in psychology that can actually leverage that to help us do our cognitive walkthroughs as we design our platform, make sure our design process is working well. So kind of bringing in even looking at the people in your team, identifying the skills that they have that might not typically fall under, what maybe a data scientist would do, but then a lot of the skills, the experience that they have can actually translate to possibly building a better product and giving overall a better experience as interacting with your teammates in your work group.
I love that, because it requires you to actually talk to people and know people, instead of taking like, oh, this person is on this team and this is their job title and this is what they do. You actually have to know the humans and a little bit about their background and what they're interested in and what they're good at, or what they're like. You actually have to humanize the work so that you even can know where you can make a space for somebody to bring a unique perspective instead of just boxing them into a corner. So I love that. One of the things that I would love to hear from all of you about before I go to the chat to see what some of the questions that the audience is asking is the things that there are to learn. Let me back up. One of the reasons why there's so many like different experiences represented in the work that you do on this panel today is because I want people to see all these different places where technology gets influenced, and people have to make decisions every day in all these different places and spaces building AI. And it's important that all of those people then be very up to speed, or as up to speed as you can be every day about what is going on in the world and what are the things to know. And it feels like the amount of things that there are to know in diversity, equity, and inclusion, it seems endless. And because there's a lot of people with a lot of different experiences. And I'm curious, how do you as leaders in the AI space educate yourself? How do you inform yourself so that you're able to lead with confidence and then enter into those rooms and ask the right questions and bring in the right people? How do you stay educated about the space so that you can move with confidence in the work that you do? And you can go in any order you'd like.
I can start.
Sure.
It's a really important and sort of hard question. I think for me, we've done everything from having among like our product leadership team, having reading groups about different topics, and we share a lot of like current news. We have a very active chat where everyone's sharing, did you read this? Did you see this? I've also started sort of book clubs and reading groups with my team, with a larger circle of people. But then, you know, it's not just sort of about like studying and knowing the issues. You also want to understand the history and interact with, particularly if you're working on a problem like we're actively trying to work with a particular group, then we might also want to learn more about the history. And so we've had experts come in and give talks. We've had different people from those communities come and share their experience using the product, their experience with a particular technology, their thoughts. Obviously also working with different employee resource groups inside of Microsoft who might sort of represent a different community and give their input. And so there isn't sort of like one thing. It's kind of a lifestyle, and it's really, I think, making sure that you prioritize that kind of learning and information and sharing, right? Like no one person could just stay up to date themselves. And so it's also about building a network where together you're all staying up to date and you're informing each other. And so if we think like responsible AI, we have fairness experts who really plugged into fairness. And so when topics come up that are like very heavily in the fairness field, I'm going to trust them to also make sure that we don't miss anything or don't know something. And similarly for privacy or some other area, right? And so I think that's another thing is you really have to turn it into a culture of learning and a network of learning, because you can't do it yourself.
Yeah. I mean, I just thank you, Sarah. I'd like to add on what Sarah's saying. And I think we all, like you said, Kiesha, we all have different experiences, right? For Sarah, it's all about learning and making sure that she stay up to date. For me, early on, when some of, George Floyd happened and a lot of things happened, and it was a reflection, and some of it is a teaching moment. And just, everyone is asking me, like, how do we help? Like, what is your experience like? Do you experience these things and all? So I think I like to continue educating myself, but at the same time, I also wanted to sort of, it gets exhausting when you're having to talk about, like, you have similar experiences like everyone else at work, right? Yeah, you pay your bills and you have to go and exercise, and you have so many challenges you're tackling through. And then on top of that, just, the burden of being a certain race weighs on you, right? So, and when you come to work and people wanted to learn, like, what is it like to be you? Like, tell us more. How can we help you? How can we sort of make, better decisions, to not be, like, to be an ally, to be supportive and all. What I started doing is, like, earlier, like, I was just taking my time to sort of explain to people, like, here is my experience. And I have a different background. I grew up in Ethiopia. Like, my experience was completely different than as a person who was born and raised in the US and being Black. So my experience is a little different, but there are some commonalities, right? So what I'm telling you is this, but the best way for you to be educated is, here are the resources, and here are the ways that you can educate yourself so that you can be an ally. And you can also kind of spread the knowledge and all. So I started, and it also helps me to sort of be educated on some of the things that I didn't know, because, I didn't grow up here. So But that's my answer to your question.
Okay.
So I'd like to share next. And I think for me, there are two things. I'll share one thing from my work life, and I'll share thing from my life. With my work life or professional life, I noticed that one of the things I really needed to get over is that I'm gonna make mistakes. For me, I'm very clear. I'm gonna make mistakes, but I'll acknowledge them. I'll learn from them and move on to the next thing. And being okay that it's not even like it's not about me. It's about making other people feel comfortable and making peace with the fact that I'm gonna mess up. I'm gonna learn. I'm gonna apologize. I'm gonna learn and then grow from it. And I think putting myself out there and not feeling for my own feelings as much as kind of really making sure that I'm taking other people's feeling into account. I'm actively listening to them. So I think that really made a big difference for me. And just, I'm human. I will mess up, but I will step up every day to be better. And I think that makes a difference for me in growing overall. From my life, one thing I find a lot is that integrating my interests around diversity and inclusion and equity into the things that I like to do. I like to listen to podcasts a lot, so it's very easy for me to keep educated, to hear even outside of tech, outside of my own experiences, listening to podcasts that discuss other people's experiences, getting more educated through those, and kind of making it a seamless part of my life to where yes, I listen to a podcast every morning as I commute, but now as I get ready, and then kind of having that reflect the various things I want to learn as well, and just making it part of my daily activity has been a big change for me.
To add on to that, I think that's a great point. It's definitely about being comfortable with how much you don't know, right? Like you staying up to date just shows you like how much you realize you don't know. And so it's definitely not a goal of knowing everything, right? It's knowing enough to know what you don't know, so you know when to go ask for help, or when something you're going to do is actually going to have an impact, and then you realize you need to know more.
Absolutely. Any thoughts on this, Marieke, before I head to the audience questions? We've got a couple. All right, head on in. So let's go to the audience. All right, we have a question from Catherine. So she was asking, what are some tactics employed to make sure that your customers use your AI responsibly?
Yeah, that's a great question, and there's a lot of different things. So if I want to share a little bit about how we sort of, like, what is it like to do this, how we think about it. One of the things you want to look at is, what are the ways that it might not be used responsibly? And like sort of a major difference might be, is it not being used responsibly because the person doesn't understand? Like they don't understand that the technology wouldn't work well in this use case, or they don't understand that they should add a human in the loop, right? And in those cases, if it's about the person not understanding, that's where, for example, for all of our services, we're releasing documentation that provides transparency about the capabilities, about the limitations, different things that you might want to think about. We have guidance for responsible integration and use, including even like user research or design patterns, if that's helpful. But better than documentation, right, is if we can build it into the product, right? If you can have the product interface either sort of give that information, give that guidance, or just build it out, right? So if the issue is that, for example, you have something where you only want people to look at aggregates, you don't want them to make a decision on any individual, because any individual, it might be wrong, but the overall average is meaningful, then you can design the product to not show the information about individuals, right? And then you're sort of building in that responsible use. And so that's kind of the approach we take there, where we're really wanting to empower our customers to use it responsibly, to have the right information, to build that right into the product experience as much as possible. Now, on the other side, there are cases where people are concerned about abuse or misuse, right? That's absolutely something we need to think about with this technology, with these technologies. And in that case, obviously, if we can just design it out of the product, that's the best option. And sometimes we can, if we are doing that sort of impact assessment up front and are able to think about those cases and just, like I said, pick the right prediction problem, pick the right sort of design of the product. There's a lot you can do there. But in some cases, it's the thing about the technology that gives the benefit is also the thing that makes it powerful for this, these use cases that we don't want to see. And so we just released our GA'd our first ever limited access service, custom neural voice, which is a technology that allows you to make a voice of a person that is extremely lifelike. And I have seen customers do amazing things with this, right? You can make really fun entertainment experiences for children. You can make amazing education experiences. But on the other hand, we don't, we have to think about making sure that people aren't being impersonated. We're not increasing misinformation, like listeners aren't being deceived as a result of this technology. And so for this one, we have gone further, right? And you actually need to apply with your use case to use the technology. We've built in features that actually technically sort of verify that the speaker has said, I understand that a synthetic voice is being made of my voice, and that's compared to the training data, and you can't train unless these two match, right? And so we have a range of things that we want to do if what we're trying to prevent is like abuse and misuse of the technology as opposed to just a misunderstanding. And I think we're at the point where, these are equally important, and we have to look at both for all the technologies.
Well, for me, I have to jump in.
Yeah.
Like, to me, this comes back to transparency. Like, if a person thinks that they are talking to a real person and it's not, that's a problem. So I often have discussions with customers and even, internal in the team, like, oh yeah, we need to, just make it just like a human. I'm like, well, really? Because it isn't, and it will never be. So why should it be? So I would rather be upfront and say, okay, this is an automated response or whatever, and these are the things that I can do, and you can talk to a human agent if you want to. So I think that being upfront that it is not real, I think is important, and like the consent of like, what do we do with their data if we do anything with it at all? But yeah, I share the concern of what if it is misused or intentionally misused. We've seen this a lot, relatively recent, in how the wrong news, the wrong information, deep fake media is coming out and just really damaging people.
Yeah, and so I think that's like a perfect example. And so for custom neural voice, we do require that it is obvious that the voice is synthetic. So in a setting where, so many of the voices are fictional, like an example where it might not be fictional is an author reading their own audiobook, for example. But if it's many of the cases where it's fictional, it's obvious it's a synthetic voice. Most people don't think they're talking to Bugs Bunny. But in the cases where it's not obvious, then it needs to be disclosed in a way that's meaningful, like not buried in the terms, but in a way that empowers the listener to actually understand. And so I completely agree. And this is exactly the kind of thing that when we think about responsible use, it's not just that, they're using a setting they shouldn't, but details like that on how we make sure that like the listener understands, or the person in the other side of the conversation understands.
I want to share this question from Sam in the chat. Sam asks, how should companies think about ethically identifying segments based on dimensions of race, gender, religion, disability? For example, identifying if a feature or a model underperforms for a specific race or a specific disability, or is that even an appropriate approach?
Thomas, you're shaking your head. Do you want to go, or?
No, I was just kind of sparks, some of the, I used to be in Bing Ads, and a few years ago, Facebook had, allowed advertisers to target based on gender, race, and ethnicity, and all. And the model was pretty good at the specifically, it's been heavily biased, and it was targeting people. For example, if you are in the minority group, it targets like a lower sort of paying job. And if you are a woman, it targets nursing, and taxi driver for men. So it was basically, at some point, Facebook had to turn it off because it was just not working, good. So is it, not using it also is basically creates a model which is going to be wildly inaccurate, right? So it's a very careful balance between not using the data versus using it. But we really want to promote like using it in a way that's responsible and fair. But Sarah, do you want to add?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. And so probably an important part of the conversation is, are we using that feature in the model to like have the model take actions like targeting someone, versus are we using that feature to test the model to understand how it works for different communities or different groups of people? And I think that even if we're using it, so if we're using it in testing, it's a little more straightforward to think about, but it's still really important to recognize that if we take speech to text for an example, which is an area I'm working very closely on, what we're actually wanting to look at is linguistic variation in places where we've missed that in our model and we're not actually able to perform very well for that type of variation, right? And that may be more clustered in some particular communities, but it's not like a one-to-one mapping, and it's not, say, people with a particular identity, women or who identify by a particular race, present that way and have that linguistic variation, or that they always use it. And it might be that a community in Texas has this combination of features, and a community in New York has this combination of features. And so we look at a lot of these in testing to make sure that we're not missing anything, right? To help us kind of make sure we do have that distribution in our data. But a lot of the exercise then is to understand, okay, if we're seeing a difference that can sort of be clustered by a factor like gender, what is the underlying actual attributes that's causing that difference? And that's where I was talking a little bit earlier about sometimes we have to go on a longer journey to understand, well, what linguistic variation might we see that's different in a community, and why is that, and what is the history of it, and how would we better represent it in our models, right? And so in a sense, they are part of the journey to help us understand, but they don't sort of represent the final answer. And we're not, looking solely to say like, oh, well, yeah, gender has, very strong meaning in itself in this model. It's a way for us to sort of test and uncover places where we might be underperforming.
So I want to add something to this, which I think is also important. So from our experimentation perspective, we would like to measure on all of these segments, but again, like, these are not things that you want to be collecting at large scale. Yeah. Adding to this, so there's one thing that for me causes more problem is that when companies start to predict these attributes based on some behaviors for the user, which actually really where I believe like some companies are trying to predict who your persona is so that they can target you with better ads or something like that, right? And that's really where I feel it even kind of takes this step further. It's like a user maybe have chosen not to share that aspects about them, but then we're taking it a bit further and trying to, I'm actually going to predict what your gender is, and I'm going to show you features, ads, or a product that just based on what I think you are, which I think is even more damaging overall. So one of the things that, hopefully we get to see at some point is this ability for me to share me as a user, to share different aspects of me with a product, that knowing what they're going to use it for. So having this clear contract as to what my information is being used for, having control over my my data, and revoking access at some point, or giving it access only for specific features, for specific aspects of it. I think giving this user an agency over their data and control over their data, I really think is something I'm kind of really looking forward in our community to see.
Wonderful. Thank you all for that. I want to make sure we have time to kind of get into another, at least one more question. And this is a bit fun. So Widad, you mentioned that you listen to podcasts when you're doing your kitchen to couch commute. And Stanley was asking, would love to hear what your favorite podcasts are. And of course, any other panelists or folks, share what it is you're listening to and consuming that's helping you out in your journey.
Sure. Just quickly, the HBR IdeaCast, they have some really good, they talk to really cool guests about kind of various issues in the workplace. D&I is a big one of them. Code Switch is really great. Throughline from NPR is really good because it gives you history about, how we actually got here in certain aspects. So sometimes it kind of fights against some of the assumptions that we have. And 99% Invisible is also good. It talks about design, and it's really, it kind of gives more context around this. There's a couple from the New York Times that are really good, like special ones that are really interesting. Nice White Parents is a recent one, which was also controversial, but it was very educational as well.
Awesome. Anyone else want to share resources?
Just share a non-work related, because like podcasts for me are my downtime. Like I walk my dogs and it takes an hour and a half. So that's when I listen to things. So Terrible Thanks for Asking. That's one that I enjoy. And the Jonathan Funes, Getting Curious, always has some good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and books, always good.
You can do books too. It doesn't have to be only podcasts.
Yeah, I'd say I'm a reader, like as in consuming by text works very well for me. So that would be my approach. And I happen to be currently reading Tools and Weapons, which is a book, by our president at Microsoft. And that's actually been quite wonderful in sort of sharing, let's say, the recent history of a lot of these let's say, hot topics related to technology. So I've really been enjoying that one so far.
All right. Thomas, any gold nuggets from you?
I just started reading the book called Mediocre. This is I know. And yes, I listened to her talk on, do you want to talk about race? And I was really inspired by that. So I just picked up the book. So I'm excited. I look forward to reading it during spring break.
Awesome. Yeah, well, and I'm glad that you mentioned Mediocre and Iwema Olua, because I was actually sharing advice that she gave to me in an event that I went to, and I was sharing that in the breakout that I was in, where she was talking about, as you do work in diversity, equity, and inclusion in these corporate spaces like we do, remember that you are one of the people that you're fighting for. And that if the work tears you apart, then it's actually serving the oppressive system. It's serving white supremacy. It's serving the things that crush us. So just as we all are gathered in this space doing the work, just remember that remember that you are one of the people that you are doing this work for. So we're going to end there. Thank you, everybody, for sharing more about, giving us a window into your world, sharing a little bit about how you influence things from your seat at the table. And I hope that everyone who was listening here today can think about what are the ways that you can get involved, or the things that you can influence today or for the future. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much. Bye.